might happen. You never know.
That is a good point. I was reading an article before class got started this morning that advertising is going to be through the roof on this Super Bowl show. They know so many people are going to be tuned in.
And new products too. Advertisers that typically wouldn't, so
Right.
we're gonna see cosmetics and toys and just a different um demographic being targeted
Yep.
because of
Yeah.
her.
Well, the
I wonder,
Swift
will they
man,
have any hair growth advertisements? I'd be interested in that.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, we're at 9:01. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds or so before we get started here. For those of you that are just hopping online, we're just having a chat about the Super Bowl this Sunday. So we don't have a particular team in mind, but Matthew, are you rooting for the Niners or the Chiefs?
Yeah, I grew up in the Northwest, and the Niners are the
Oh, gosh.
closest team besides the Seahawks, so I got to go with the Niners. Yeah,
Niners. Okay.
yeah,
Right. Hearing a couple fans for the Niners.
yeah.
Ashley, I see your comment. Go Niners. Very nice.
I am super excited.
I love it. All right. Well, I will go ahead and get us started here. I know that we have a couple more participants that'll be joining in the next few moments, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time on the call. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first session on public trust and advocacy. We have a really great presentation lined up for you this morning. And before I introduce your new facilitator, John Phelps, I'd first like to hand it over to Eric Manival from Beach Fleshman for any updates or announcements he'd like to share with our group. So Eric, good morning, and I'll hand it over to you.
thanks, Cassandra. Good morning on behalf of everybody from Beach Fleischman. Glad that everybody's in the class and enjoying it so much. I like one of the things I like to do is talk about hot topics that are out there right now. And one thing that really is pretty big is ERC credits. The period to apply for them has closed, but the big hot topic issue that I want to address is that there were certain companies out there that were kind of pushing folks through that door and getting credits when they maybe shouldn't have been eligible. And right now, the IRS actually has a very, very favorable kind of voluntary correction period. They're letting you keep a pretty good chunk of it. If you take a second look and realize, hey, I really wasn't qualified for these credits, and you voluntarily return them, you can keep like up to 20%. There's different calculations you have to go through. But they're going after some of these companies, and we expect that they're going to be going after some of these companies' entities. So if you went to somebody who just does ERC credits, you might just double check with your CPA firm. Hey, did I really qualify? It's a pretty easy calculation to get through. So just to keep yourself safe. And that's all I got, Cassandra.
Thank you, Eric. Very timely indeed. All right. So as a reminder, we are scheduled to go until 12:30 p.m. Arizona time today. We will have a few breaks staggered throughout our session, and your facilitator, John, will break down our exact presentation agenda for today once he gets started. So I have a short introduction I'd like to read for John. And John, you're so well accomplished. I would say this is probably my favorite bio to read in the whole program. So I'll go ahead and read that off. John Phelps is the owner and founder of Pathfinder Executive Consulting, LLC, a small veteran-owned business focused on helping organizations achieve success. Before establishing his own consulting firm, John served as Chief Executive Officer and Director of the State Bar of Arizona for 10 years, a nonprofit organization operating under the authority of the Arizona Supreme Court. The bar serves the public and enhances the legal profession by promoting the competency, ethics, and professionalism of its 24,000 members, and by enhancing the administration of justice. Before returning to Arizona to take his position with the State Bar, John served as Chief of Staff of the U.S. General Services Administration, or GSA, in Washington, D.C. Prior to his service in Washington, John served as Chief Operating Officer of the Grand Canyon chapter of the American Red Cross in Phoenix, Arizona. John also previously served as the Deputy Director of the Arizona Office of Homeland Security in the Office of the Governor of Arizona. The son of a career Army officer, John served nearly 25 years in the U.S. Army. He retired from active duty as a colonel in the Judge Advocate General's Court in 2003. John graduated magna cum laude from St. John's University in Minnesota with a bachelor's degree in government. He holds a JD from the University of Arizona College of Law and Master's of Laws degrees from the Judge Advocate General School and the University of Virginia School of Law. John has been a member of the Arizona Bar since 1986. He is a graduate of the Stanford Graduate Business School's Leading Change and Organizational Renewal Executive Course. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to John for this morning. Take it away.
Thank you, Cassandra. I'm always kind of taken aback by the organizations that are involved in this program and all the great work that you do. And so thank you for the privilege that you give me to spend some time talking about one of my favorite topics, which is nonprofit leadership. You know, when you think about nonprofit organizations and the role that they play in our country, it's pretty amazing, right? I mean, all of the gaps that your organizations fill, right? Because government can't do it, because, you know, folks don't have the resources to do the things that you do. It's really remarkable. So you should be proud of the work that you do. I was just checking in because today's topic is about public trust, and we'll talk about advocacy in our next session, about kind of where nonprofits stand with respect to public trust generally. And a 2023 study recently published shows that 52% of Americans trust nonprofits. And while we'd like that to be higher, right, it's the second highest rating with respect to public trust, just following the military, which is a little north of 60%. So the public, we're already in a pretty good place compared to Congress, which has a 8% trust factor in the country. So as organizations, we're doing pretty well. But the challenge, right, is that in today's world, unfortunately, I think for a number of reasons, public trust in institutions is waning, right? And so we're going to spend some time talking today about how do we obtain public trust, how do we keep it, and when it is in jeopardy, what do we do to recover it? Just a couple of quick thoughts about what I would call rules of engagement for today's session. This is not going to be death by PowerPoint, okay? So I'm not going to just spew content to you and have you read a bunch of slides. I've been on the receiving end of that kind of thing, and so I'm going to try to spare you that. What that requires, right, is that all of you share and chime in. We're gonna have a couple of breakout sessions. I think breakout sessions are where some of the best conversations and information is exchanged. So we'll have a couple of breakout sessions. I'll go through the agenda in a minute. But in terms of rules of engagement, I'd really ask that we put aside whatever other things are pulling at us, that we not be doing email at the same time or multitasking, that we really focus. I will give you 2 10-minute breaks, and so you can check email or feed the dog or whatever you need to do. But I would ask that while we're together, we honor each other's time and we actually focus on what we're talking about today. If you've got video capability, I'd ask you to turn that on. I think virtual sessions are difficult already because more than 70% of what we receive when we communicate is nonverbal, right? So even if you're in the Brady Bunch, pattern here, at least I can see, if Lynn Ann isn't agreeing, I can see her shaking her head, right? Or if Matt is agreeing, I can see him shaking his head this way. Or if somebody's, doing this, I have an ability to see that, right? And we have an ability to react. So if you've got video, I'd ask you to turn that on. I'd like to offer that we're in a safe zone here, right? So I'm not going to share anything regarding your organizations outside this space with all of you, and I'd hope that you'd feel protected and able to share whatever experiences or concerns that you might have, and know that we all agree, kind of the Vegas rule, right? The Las Vegas rule, that what happens in NMI 210 stays in NMI 210 with each other. I'd ask us to take some risks today, and chime in and share some thoughts. There are no bad ideas or bad questions. There's a great diversity of experiences with our group today. I had a chance to go through the pre-course assignments, and some of you have some pretty considerable experience with respect to advocacy, with respect to working with government officials, with respect to public trust issues. And so that's where I think the best experience comes from in this course, is when we share that, right? I'll share some more stories with you about my own experience. I'm an old guy with a a lot of mileage on me, and so I can share some of my war stories, but they're not today, right? These are things that have happened in some cases many years ago, whereas what's happening with all of you today is relevant and timely. And so I'd ask you to take some risks with respect to our participation. So and then lastly, in terms of rules of engagement, just that we show some respect for each other. It goes without saying, but that we respect when we may disagree. I doubt there's going to be a lot of that, but certainly to be able to have conversations in a respectful way. Okay. Any questions about rules of engagement today? No? Okay, so let me let's get the PowerPoint up here. I will use it a little bit here. Can everybody see that? Yes. Okay, there's some nodding heads. Thanks, Kimberly. You go by Kimberly or Kim?
Kim works. Everything is
Kim.
set up for Kimberly, but Kim works
Okay.
for sure.
Okay, great, thanks. So we've broken this session into this module into two sessions. Today's session is really going to be about these topics, and I'm not going to read the slides to you. You can kind of cruise through there, but we're really going to focus on the topic of public trust. And then next session, we'll talk about in 2 weeks about lobbying and the legislative process. Now, having said that, I want to go where you want to take these conversations. And so, I'm not limited to this outline here. And so certainly we can stray from that. But generally, these are the learning goals that we've set for this course. The agenda, I'm going to talk about the course project so that there's no confusion. That's due on March 3rd. And I want to make sure everybody understands how that, what's required there. We'll have a short breakout session, a warm-up exercise to kick things off. We'll have a discussion about public trust, and then we'll do more breakout work regarding the Wounded Warrior Project case. Now, that's a bit dated. It's the Wounded Warrior Project as an organization had some trouble a number of years ago. So, in addition to talking about what happened to the organization, we'll talk about kind of where it's at today as well, right? So I don't want anybody to think that this organization is not a legitimate, good organization. It's a great case study in what happens when you lose public trust and how do you regain it. And then we'll talk about organizational ethics. What kinds of things can we do as an organization, internally and externally, but mostly an internal look about, do we have codes of conduct? What kinds of checks and balances do we have in place? We'll have a breakout exercise for that as well. And then we'll wrap up our session and talk just a little bit about the next session. So breaks, I'm committing to 2 breaks, 2 10-minute breaks, one at 10 o'clock and one at 11:15. So, these are comfort breaks. You can refill your coffee, check your email, those kinds of things. But that's the general course that we're going to follow today. So let's talk about the project. there are two options, right? So you don't have to do both of these things. What I found in the past, and I think this is the 5th or 6th time I've done this course in the last 5 years, maybe even more than that, is that for some people, depending on your organization and the role that you have, you may not be as involved with the legislative processes or government officials or working with lobbying and those kinds of things. And so we created a second option, which is actually this option, which is the public trust option. So under this option, you will put together a proposal for your organization, right, on how you might improve the public's trust in your organization, right? And so what I hope you walk away with in this module is something that's actually going to help, right? That you could actually take to your boss, take to your board. We have a number of folks that are chief executives in their organizations, but actually walk away with something that might be useful to your organization. And so are there things after today's discussion that we talk about that might improve, right, your public trust posture? And my position is you can never rest on your laurels, right? With respect to public trust. It's something that takes constant investment, right? You got to constantly put money in the bank. And so this proposal would contain these. It's an outline, and to make it even easier, we've provided in Canvas a template that you can just fill in. You don't have to figure out the format or anything else. There's both a PDF and a Word document template. So if this is the option you choose, then you would put together this this proposal and submit it. The second option really has to do with next session, 2 weeks, on public advocacy and public policy. And this is a proposal that you put together, again, for your organization, about, a public policy initiative, whether there's, challenges or opportunities out there facing your organization that you think either is being affected by legislation or government action. And keep in mind, this is the full spectrum, right? So some of you are affected more by local government. Some of you depend on federal grants or state grants. So, it's the full gamut, right? The full spectrum of government entities and agencies where you might benefit from either connecting or promoting a policy change or supporting or opposing a policy in the future. And so this is the public policy option. So just to be clear, you don't have to do both. You can pick one or the other, whichever is going to be more relevant and helpful to your organization. And like with the first option, there's a template in Canvas, PDF, Word document. You can fill it in. And so here's the deal. I recognize that all of you are busy folks, right? And you're squeezing this in between long days, probably long weekends, lots of other challenges to your time. And so we've tried to make it as simple as possible, because it's not so much, from my perspective, about you demonstrating that you've mastered the content, because I trust that you will, but it's that you walk away with something useful, right? Even if it's something that you hold in your back pocket and hold on for a while or improve. So any questions about the project? Yeah, feel free to jump in or do the little hand signal if you've got questions or you want to put something up. Okay, so let's start with our warm-up exercise. And what we're going to do is, how many participants do we have here, Cassandra?
About 15 or 16.
15 or 16? And so what do you think? Should we break into groups of 4?
Yeah, I can go ahead and do that.
So we'll break you into groups of 4. and we're going to spend just 8 to 10 minutes. So this is a quick, right, speed dating. Introduce yourself, your organization, and your role. And then how would you rate your organization regarding its degree of public trust and why? Is it high, pretty good, average, needs work, or low? And so we'll spend, like I said, 8 to 10 minutes sharing kind of who we are and what we think about the level of public trust. And then we'll come back in and we'll have a discussion and kind of see where people think they're at, or any observations regarding what you heard from other folks. So sound like a plan? Any questions before we go into breakout groups? This is good. Lots of thumbs up. Awesome. All right, so I'll let Cassandra do her magic, and then I'll pop in and visit the groups after they're formed. Go ahead, Cassandra. Thanks. All right, do we have everybody back?
Yes, that's everyone.
Looks like it. So I had a chance to parachute in to a couple of, to all the breakout groups and some great conversation. And so before I share any of my observations, I'm going to open the floor to all of you for you to share your own observations. Anything that you think would be helpful with respect to your own experience, or something that you heard from one of your colleagues that you think was insightful with respect to this issue of public trust. Don't everybody chime in at once. Antonia, do you go by Antonia?
Yeah, Antonia with an A.
Antonia, okay.
Yeah. So I think so we did our introductions. But I think one of the things that we actually were talking about current affairs in terms of public trust and sort of hot topics, which we discussed 2 of them. And as I'm thinking about that, I mean, it just really highlights the overall perspective that the public, the community at large can get, and how impactful that could be, good or bad. So one of the areas right now that I think are more related, and Karim has a much more detailed contextual insight into the industry, but the big perspective from it is the Medicaid fraud that Arizona has seen, and how that's impacting a lot of us. But unfortunately, I think because of the headlines and the communication around it, gives a really negative perspective. So you have like the recovery support service industry. I think everyone could probably say there's a negative connotation, at least associated with something like sober living homes, that sort of industry. I was in that industry for a while, but it's also even bleeding into what I do. So now we're concerned, especially in terms of the governor's remarks about compliance and oversight. We're kind of making sure in terms of public policy and keeping an eye out for what's coming down the road, that we're not continue to be or more regulated just by association in a sense, because we're also funded by Medicaid dollars. So I think there's probably several of us who are, either familiar with or have some sort of impact on our organization because of that lack of public trust, I think, in that area from that scandal. So. Yeah,
no, that's a great observation at what I call the mud splashing principle, right? So, one organization or there's fraud in one particular with respect to a particular sector or with respect to a particular organization, and suddenly it splashes, arguably all nonprofits, but certainly ones that are similarly situated. And in one of the groups I parachuted into, I think it was maybe Matt talking about Humane Society. If you have one Humane Society that has a problem, suddenly everybody, your Humane Society, even though it has nothing to do with the other Humane Society, right, gets splashed with that mud, And so being aware, right? I think that's your point, Antonia, is being aware and proactive in getting out in front of that and saying, hey, that's not us, right? These are the things that we do that are different, that separate us from not that we're gonna throw mud back on that organization, but say that's not us, right? And realizing that if you don't do that, that you may without knowing it, lose some support because people by association, right, are thinking that your organization is that way. Brett, you have some thoughts as well?
Yeah, one of the things we talked about in our group was different types of public trust and distinguishing between public trust with lawmakers and policymakers and public trust with the general public. And sometimes when you have higher trust with policymakers and lawmakers, you may have less public trust with the general public because you work closely with government, and kind of balancing both of those forms of public trust.
Wow, that's another great observation, right? Because you're right, public trust is a general term, but it really is broken up into different, for lack of a better word, segments or stakeholders that different groups, you have a different relationship with each group that is connected in one way or another to your organization, right? And that you have to manage those, and really, I think one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit, Brett, that you're touching on here is the idea of how you spend your social capital, right? So your association or taking a stand or being supported by one group might affect support from other stakeholders in your in your community. And so being aware that there are these unintended consequences sometimes, right? And this has been particularly true with our political environment, right? And so organizations that have decided to get behind one campaign or another, not a political campaign, but a campaign against this or for that, may have the unintended consequence of aggravating another group, right, of support within the organization. So, and sometimes we have to take unpopular stands as an organization, but recognize what that's going to potentially mean in terms of support from other and being willing to lose. That's when I talk to boards about having the courage, provided you're in your lane, right? That your organization is sticking to its mission, that it's not going outside to take positions on particular issues that really don't have anything to do with your organization, right? Which is always a danger. But that if you're in your lane and you're taking a position, you can't make everybody happy. That's the point, right? And so, but recognizing that with eyes wide open, when you do take a position that may be charged or sensitive, that it may have, it may result in aggravating some group of folks that normally support your organization. Good point. Any other observations?
Yeah, I'll point something out.
Yes, Aaron.
I noticed, because I work at Crossroads, a pretty large organization, and I've seen it happen a few times where the media gets involved and takes something and just completely twists it, and that can damage public trust, I think, greatly. Reading things on the internet of people, putting their 2 cents in on a topic and having no idea what they're talking about. I've seen that. That's one thing I think really sticks out. And the reason I share this is because we have recently had a detox center at our corporate office, and we've paused that, but it's within a neighborhood, and we got a lot of negative feedback, and it was on the news and stuff, and just the way some of it was spun, I feel like it could damage the public trust and kind of our reputation. But I think we've learned this, and Krem and I work together, and we've learned this, I think, in this course, is like, what can we do to counteract that, by giving back more to the community, things like that. So it's just that I've noticed it's like a balancing thing, and some things are out of our control, stuff like that. So
Yeah. 2 points there that I think are very helpful, Aaron. The first is it's more and more difficult to influence and inform the media, right? And you know, part of it is the proliferation of social media, right? And there's so many channels now that it's impossible. There's a lot of folks that will say, well, you got to stay on top of social media and you got to have somebody on your staff or volunteer that's, and I don't disagree with that, but it's almost mission impossible, right? I mean, because there's so many platforms and people are putting stuff out, on all these different platforms. And then you have the traditional media, right? TV news, newspapers, a lot of that stuff is online now too, but that has changed. Journalism has changed, and it's moving so quickly. And there's, in my experience, a rush to get a story out rather than getting the story right. And so, I think the solution to that is, and solution is probably not the right word, but is to recognize that's the world we live in, and to create, at least with the traditional media, TV network, local networks, relationships, right? And sometimes those relationships can be relationships that have relationships, right? So sometimes it's a board member that is particularly adept or has connections with the media. Or you've got the luxury of having somebody on your staff that's a communications person, but not letting, especially if there is you see potentially a bad story, or a story that's coming that might be negative, that you get out in front of it. So I recall when I was at the state bar, when we knew there were bad, stories coming for whatever reason, we would reach out to the media and not wait for the media to make its own story and say, hey, this is coming. This is what's happened. Our phone lines are open. The worst thing you can do is say no comment, right? That's the worst thing you can do, or not take the call because we're too busy from the local media, But yeah, I think that's the media issue, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But embracing, right, and not fighting it, knowing that that's the world we live in, and to the extent that we can get out in front of stories rather than wait for them to develop. You'll see that in the Wounded Warrior case study, right? Sort of the going into the bunker and hoping nobody notices. That's not a good approach. Great point. Others, any other comments or thoughts?
I'll jump in because our group hasn't been heard from yet, but
Yes. Go ahead, Kim.
we absolutely discussed a number of things. One of them being, at least with IDE specifically, public trust. A lot of times it is you look at Charity Navigator, right? And IDE, we're very fortunate. We enjoy 100% rating, 4 out of 4 stars. Public trust as far as a platform like that, great. And we are very mission minded. We're transparent, but half the state doesn't want me to have a job. It doesn't want me to do what I'm doing. So I'm always in this battle of, I've got public trust. I've also got the legislature that is, this is not what I do, guys. I'm going to put it out there, school choice. And I even know within this particular group, there's going to be people pro and people against. I get that. It's just the way it is. In the legislature, it is not a bipartisan issue at all. But in the public, it is extremely bipartisan. There is both sides of the aisle utilizing school choice, all these things. So I'm caught in this world of narratives and politics, and it's really just about kids. And so I struggle with trying to make sure we can take care of kids, but we do it in such a way that everybody understands, keep the public trust high, because we do want to be transparent. But by the same token, it's a daily battle at the legislature. It is especially right now. And so public trust is great in certain platforms, but you've got to look at it from all aspects. It can't just be, oh, Charity Navigator says we're great. You've got to be out there making sure you're making your case for your mission. And so that's something that my big part of my job is. And something that Flannan had mentioned in our group, which I think was right on the money. We have this amazing group here. Afterwards, we've got people, boards we can talk to, but we've got each other to bounce these things off of, because this is we're part of that public, and we're in the trenches, all of us, in one way or another.
Yeah, great point, Kim. And I think we can't rely, right? Whether it's Candid, the GuideStar is another online charity navigator. Even if we've got good ratings there, not everybody's going there to get the information, and a lot of it's word of mouth. And so, one of the things we'll talk about later in terms of sort of the social marketing is identifying all the different, right? All the different categories of people who care or care because they want to support, or care because they want to undermine our organizations, understanding where those groups are and how to communicate, right, effectively, and reach out. And that's more than just the chief executive, right? It's got to be, I always talk to boards about, the board has an ambassadorial responsibility as well. They need to be out, singing the praises of the organization and connecting with their networks and talking about, and when there's issues in the legislature, it shouldn't just be, you standing in front of the podium, Kim, being given 1 minute, right? If that from a committee. I've been there, done that. I got a lot of T-shirts, and it doesn't work very well, right? All of the work with the legislature happens outside the hearing room, right? In front of coffee, or at lunch, or in the legislator's home office. So really good point. Well, let me just move on to a couple of high points, and then we'll take our 10-minute break here pretty soon. Let me just get back on here. Okay, we talked. So we talked a little bit about what public trust is, right? And I want to go to the article that was in the required readings, which I have to confess is a little wonky, right? It's a little cerebral, little academic. Not to suggest that it was beyond any of your capabilities, but when I read it, and I've read it, dozens of times, it makes my head hurt a little bit, because there's a lot of, citations to academic work and stuff that's been done, and that's okay. Which means it's been, peer reviewed, and a lot of folks smarter than me have thought about this. And I agree with this approach, but I just wanted to share with you that it's not an easy article to get through, but I think it's worth our time. So it breaks public trust into a couple of different components that I think is a nice way to frame public trust. You have this idea that the public is contracting with your organization, to do certain things, right? And for 501c3 organizations, which is the majority of folks participating in this course, there are other nonprofits as well, and I think this still applies. There's an expectation that you're an agent, right? For getting things done, as I mentioned at the very top, that nonprofits do so much good work that government can't get done, people don't have the resources, and there's an expectation, especially if people are giving you their time and their treasure, that there's a contract, right? And some of you have real contracting responsibilities when it comes to grants, right? So I think Ashley, I heard talk about her, that's her wheelhouse is grant writing. That's a contract, is it not? Yeah. So are we delivering, right, what we said we were going to deliver? And so that's one component of public trust that's important. And then soliciting and receiving charitable contributions, how we do that, right? How we solicit and how we receive contributions. I'm always sort of amazed at the organizations that do this well and the organizations that really don't do this very well, right? And so I think about the sort of anonymous window mail, give to this organization, and you get 4 or 5 of those a year in the mail, and if you contribute by chance, you never hear from the organization, right? But compare that, right, and I'll use one organization as an example, the Friends of Foster Care Children, the foundation, Friends of Foster Children Foundation, I think that's it in Arizona. I recall giving a contribution to them a couple of years ago, and I got from a kid, right, a piece of paper with a colored picture that the child who had received, right, the benefit of that in the mail, right, a personal note, or you get a phone call or even an email that says, hey, thanks for your contribution. This is how we're going to put that to work. So this idea that we're soliciting and receiving charitable contributions in a way that is that's engaging, that's responsible, that's accountable, that is recognizable, right? So that's an important component of public trust. And then the third category is the custodial aspects of what do we do with the resources that we've been given, right? And the assets that we've been given. And Lance, and I heard him discuss, was pointing out what's happened in the University of Arizona. They've been in the news about the, was it $250 million that's been missing, and how his organization, Pima Community College, has doubled down on their own internal commitment to not letting something like that happen in their organization. Right, Lance? Did I get the number right?
Yes, you did. It's $50 million for the athletic department alone. Monies has just been unaccounted. And some people have been let go as a result of that. Some people have been repositioned within the organization. And it all falls back to the president. So we'll see if we have the same president in a year from now as a result of the public trust has just been shot.
Real damage control there, and damage control mode. And the University of Arizona has a foundation, much like Pima Community College has a foundation as well, right? And it doesn't matter if the foundation is its own, entity associated with the university. It gets splashed with all that mud, right? Yes. And so people that might be donors to that foundation or contributing in some other ways, are going to be affected by what's happened to the U of A. And so, yeah.
Correct. Yeah, they're going to think twice about where they're going to put their money. As a result, we're seeing an uptick because people don't really trust giving money to the U of A right now. And being a local public institution, we're the next best thing. So, yeah, because of their lack of oversight, we're reaping some of the benefit.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Lance. And then the social capital, this is what I talked a little bit about earlier. And I think it was Brett that kind of raised this issue. But how do we use the influence and the microphone, and in some organizations a megaphone? How do we use that, right, with respect to advancing the goals and the values of our organization? And this has become more tricky, or trickier. I don't know which is the proper grammar, but it's become more difficult for sure, because and it goes back to, I think, Aaron's comment about the media and social media. A comment from us, even some organizations have suffered from comments made by their staff on things like Facebook about their organization or about issues, right, become associated with that organization. And so, having a disciplined process and protocol for your board and your staff about when you're going to speak out and on what you're going to speak out, right, is really important. Because if you're not careful, a board member, board president, I remember in my organization, we had a president of our board, decided to send a letter to the governor on some really sensitive issue, And of course, it came back on us, on our organization, had nothing to do with the work of the state bar. And we were all over the news, right? About, state bar president, takes this position, and they published the letter in the newspaper and everything else. And it was like, wait a second. And of course, we didn't know. I didn't know that was that had happened. And we did damage control, right? But he was using the social capital of our organization unwittingly, right? Because his point was, hey, I sent, this is as a private citizen. I said, when you're president of the board of our organization and you do something like that, you don't get a pass. You don't get to say, oh, it's just me, right? Doesn't mean folks can't be politically involved. Doesn't mean folks can't vote their conscience. It doesn't mean folks that can't support other organizations, but they've got to be careful. We've got to be careful that we don't either represent ourselves or put ourselves out as representing the organization with respect to a particular position in terms of how we use our social capital and what issues we decide to tackle. And this is more nuanced, right? But I think in today's world, you're seeing it in the private sector, right? Just think about the Bud Light situation, right? When Anheuser-Busch decided to support the LGBTQ community, and then suddenly there's all these boycotts against Bud Light, right? And sort of pushback. That's an example in the private sector. Any questions about social capital? And then the last piece here is staying, and these are all related. I think this has a lot to do with social capital. It has a lot to do with how we use our resources, but staying true to our mission and adherence. And there are some things we can do, and I'll talk about this downstream, I think, and things that you are doing, I'm sure, in your organization that we can share about how do we stay mission focused and make sure that that's always sort of at the front and guiding what we do, right? With respect to our strategy, our values and objectives. Any questions about these sort of 5 components of public trust? With respect to that first option in terms of your course project here, I've asked that if you were going to do a public trust proposal, that you include this kind of analysis, right? That you're addressing these things in terms of where you might have opportunities to improve public trust. All right. Well, we're any questions about this before we take our break? No? Are you guys ready for a break? Come on, let's see some enthusiasm for a break. There we go. Brett says Aaron's on board. Okay, good. All right, well, look, let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 10:10 and we'll resume our conversation. Great conversation so far. Thank you so much for diving in, and we'll continue this in 10 minutes. There is a lot. Well, look, looks like Cassandra, do we have most everybody? Well, we've got a few folks missing, but I think we'll get started. So we're at the point now where I think what I'd like to do is do another breakout session. And we're going to do the case study for the Wounded Warrior Project. And included in the required readings were a bunch of online news reports about what happened there. But feel free to, while you're in your group, go to Charity Navigator or go to Candid, which used to be called GuideStar, or check and see if there's what else is going on out there, right? Because that's what donors, right, and other folks are going to go. That's where they're going to go oftentimes to look and see what's going on with your organization. Feel free to take a look at what's happening today, based in comparison to what happened years ago. Here are the questions that I'd like you to address in the breakout session. So the first is, and we're going to give you 40 minutes. So you got plenty of time with your colleagues to kind of dig down and have a conversation. And this is a platform to talk about these issues. So if you wind up talking about your own organization or organizations you've been a part of or other organizations that you've observed, you know, that's all relevant, right? This is the case study is just a platform to get us talking about these things. And so it's not so much, you know, the details about Wounded Warrior as it is about, you know, do we understand, using this as an example, you know, how public trust can be gained and lost and recovered. So how long did it take to build the trust? And you'll see quite a, you know, in terms of if you use donations as a measure of public trust, as one measure, you know, they went pretty fast, you know, it took them a while, but it was significant. And then how long did it take to lose it? What elements of public trust were in play? So we talked about those 5 elements just before we took the break. What elements of public trust were in play? And then what was the board's role in all of this? What's your assessment of the role that the board played before, during, and after the incident? And then how did the Wounded Warrior Project handle the recovery effort? What kinds of things, what measures did they take to redeem themselves? And then last, but certainly not least, is what role did the media play in all of this? And we've talked about media a bunch already this morning, but what role did the media play in all aspects of this? So Cassandra, is there a way we can put this in these questions in the chat box or leave them up? I guess you can, so that the groups can see these questions. I didn't think about that till now.
Yeah, so what I can do is once we send everybody into groups, I'll broadcast the questions out so you have them.
Perfect. Okay, great. And so we'll give you 40 minutes. I think that's what we set aside for the discussion. And then we'll come back and we'll spend a fair amount of time giving each group a chance to report out. So what that means is each group has to arm wrestle who's going to be the spokesperson for their group, because I'm gonna call on the group, and then what my hope is that you will have identified a spokesperson to share the high points. That doesn't mean other folks can't chime in, but it'll just help keep the conversation moving along. So any questions about what our requirement is for the breakout groups? Any questions about the questions? All is clear. Good. All right. So I'll let Cassandra again work her magic, and then I will parachute in just to check in and participate where appropriate. But again, looking forward to what you guys come up with after you have a chance to work together.
All right, everyone should be back now.
Awesome. All right. Somebody's off mute and I'm hearing they're typing, and it's amazing the speed of typing that they're doing. Okay, looks like we're good. All right, good. So I had a chance to sit in virtually with all the groups, and a wide-ranging discussion and perspective. So I'm really anxious to open up the floor and discuss what the groups came up with. So here's how I'd like to do this. What I'd like to do is have each group one at a time. We'll go one at a time, and as each group reports out, just add to the discussion anything that's new, right? So this isn't like I'm not scoring whether you covered all 5 issues or whether you caught everything, but I know just from sitting in on the 4 groups that every group had some unique and interesting observations and perspectives to share. So let's go in reverse order with group 4. And so who was the designated hitter for group 4? And we'll open up the conversation. Did you know what group you were in?
No, I'm not quite sure what we knew our group numbers.
Oh, okay.
Did we?
Well,
No.
let's do this then. This will even be more interesting. So if you were identified as the group spokesperson, tell me, raise your hand or show me who you were. So we got Matt, Lance, Kim, and who else? And Dana. Is it Dana or Dana?
It's Dana.
Dana, good. Gosh, I got it right. So Dana, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. So we discussed each of the questions, but I think one of the biggest things that we kind of realized is that the Wood and Word project took them like over about a decade to kind of build the trust with the public, but it was instantly lost as soon as the story broke. And they impacted all of the elements of public trust, but for me, I think, and the group, I think the biggest ones that we focused on were receiving charitable donations and contributions, because they even managed to have really large donors start to question the spending. And two of their largest donors that were mentioned in the article even created a petition requesting that the top execs get removed as the top executives in the organization, as well as they failed to adhere to the organization's mission by spending really large money, lots of money on lavish parties and hotel and travel. But one of the things I think that we kind of thought about, and initially I was like wondering, I was like, how does the board and the staff not question that spending? But clearly they weren't questioning it. So they may have not even saw an issue with the fact that they were spending all this money on stuff. So because the board was approving their budget, including approving the really large salary of those top executives, which means the board was involved and didn't see the issue with the lavish spending to begin with. And one thing that we thought was really interesting about the board is that even when they got a new top exec, the board that was involved with approving the lavish budgets for the previous set were still there. They didn't step down right away either. So like they were there even when the new top executive came in, which kind of questions like, wait, they were clearly involved in this lavish spending, so why were they still not really held accountable in the same manner that the top executives were? And then we realized that the media played a huge role. One thing I pointed out specifically is that I thought it was interesting that the article talking about the top execs, they put the images of the top execs like gigantic at the top of the article. Like these are the two people that are responsible for all this ridiculous spending, but again, overlooked the fact that the board was involved in approving those outrageous budgets in the first place. Did I miss anything? Anyone from the rest of my group?
Thanks, Dana. Good way to kick this off, right? Yeah, the board, right? What was the board doing here? I like to characterize and of course we don't know everything, but this kind of board is what I call a tourist board. We come, we have lunch, we see presentations, we go to conferences, and then we go home, right? And we put it on our resume. And that's a tourist board, right? Not exercising the fiduciary duties, the oversight. And then the other phenomenon that I've observed, which again goes to this public trust idea, and I've seen it, you all have seen it, I'm sure too, is that if boards are unpaid, right, they're voluntary boards, there can be a sense of entitlement of I'm giving my time and my energy and maybe I'm contributing. And so if I get put up in a first-class hotel, I deserve it. I mean, we why shouldn't we be wined and dined because we're giving all of our valuable time and in some cases resources. And so there can be this sense that that's okay, right? That it's a reward for my being on the board. And so those are things to watch out for in terms of sort of not only perception, but to your point, Dana, and your group's point about how are the contributions being used, right? Not only the caretaking and custody, but how are they being used with respect to the organization's mission? Great. Let's go next with Lance, and then we'll go to the other groups. Go ahead, Lance. I think you're on mute, Lance.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm just going to kind of summarize everything that Dana said. Yeah, it took about 10 years to kind of build this thing up, but it took, literally weeks to bring it down, if not less than that. One of the things we want to mention about elements, and specifically that the Wounded Warrior Project had a fiduciary responsibility with everybody's money to support these servicemen. That was one of the elements that we thought was violated. The financial resources is a key element to this whole organization, and that fiduciary responsibility, that fiduciary trust was basically blown up. When it comes to governance, the board was complacent at first. However, their complacency, we kind of felt that there were some people within that board that, they knew what was going on. They were kind of circling the wagons, but they might have been a little afraid at first to speak up. But and this leads to the next thing, once the media got a hold of it and blew it up, then I think they kind of stepped up and, did what they needed to do. The recovery, how did they handle the recovery effort? They took responsibility. They fired the CEO. They hired new leadership. They strengthened their financial controls and policies. In terms of staff layoffs, I think it's about 15%. The agency workforce, I think that was another 50%. They got rid of a lot of the executive staff and closed a lot of the offices, so they tightened things up. So that's my brief summation of basically everything that Dana said, and we've added just a couple more things about the elements.
Yeah. So the recovery piece, right? They changed leadership right away, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that's interesting to me about the leadership piece is I think in one of the articles, they were interviewing the new chief executive officer, who was a retired Army general, and asked him to comment on all of the, sort of past corruption and misuse of funds. And he had an interesting approach to that. Did anybody catch that? Anybody in the larger group or otherwise catch his approach?
I think it was kind of deflective in a way that basically we weren't going to concentrate on. We were going to kind of move on from that. That's
right. You nailed it.
And,
yeah. Not going to comment on the whatever happened in the past. Here's what we're doing now, right?
Yes.
Here's what we're doing now. Which, in one perspective, it's deflective, but it was obviously deliberate, right? So instead of saying no comment, he said, I'm not going to comment on, the character and what decisions were made by previous leadership, but here's what we're going to do now, right? And here's the steps we're going to take now. And so I think both your group and Dana's group talking about the board and the transparency piece, in my experience, when the bad news hits, that's the time to put everything out there, right? To say, here's what we've discovered, here's what's bad. But to keep going back, after you've gone to new leadership and you've started on a new course, to keep going back is sort of repeating the bad news over and over again. And so, it's probably different opinions about how he approached it. But I think part of it is timing, right? When is the right time to put all the bad news out there? And my view is in the moment that it's happened, right? You don't go, oh, nothing to see here, move along, right? Nothing to see, move along, and then it gets worse and worse and worse with each news report. And then didn't we have Senator Grassley now while calling for a congressional hearing,
Yes.
Yeah, right. And so then, now we're going to come clean, right? So timing is critical, and how the new leadership handles it is important as well. So good observations and good work. Kim, why don't we go next to you?
Absolutely. So of course, we're on track with everybody else in a lot of ways, but some of the things that we really found interesting above and beyond would be, yes, it took a while to build that public trust. Yes, it went away quickly. But in 2017, the Better Business Bureau gave them a clean bill of health. Very interesting how quickly they did that. They do enjoy a Charity Navigator of 98% with 4 stars right now. Not quite sure when that happened, but for the Better Business Bureau to give them that clean bill of health a year later, interesting. I'm sure Lennington, with all the things we've talked about, the things that he did, gave public trust. But one of the things that the elements that we really focused in on was they were providing 60% of every dollar was going towards this project, but they were selling donor information. I mean, I can't imagine any public thinking that's okay. They were selling their donor information. To get over that's going to take a bit, but Lennington was able to accomplish that. We think a lot of that had to do with, yes, the change of leadership, yes, the board, the firing of the people that needed to be fired. He took a pay cut, all those kinds of things, but they were also really promoting the success stories. They were getting into the public through the media. Hey, if it weren't for WWP, we would not have survived. My husband is around because of it. They made sure those stories were out there. Then in 2020, they donated $10 million to help the wounded and the ill veterans afflicted with COVID. So they were putting their money where their mouth was. So they were trying to do a lot of things that would make the public go, okay, they're doing better. They're taking pay cuts. They're making sure more people are getting helped. From the calculations we could see from the 990s, it looks like more like 72% of their dollars are going to help, which is better than 60, but is it still good enough? Their salaries aren't really great, guys. I mean, their executives, 435,000, 343,000, 338,000, 370, 300,000. They still are very top heavy when they're money. So it's very interesting how they can have these great ratings when they're still getting a lot of money. They're not having the lavish parties. They're not selling donor information, things like that. But it is very interesting that I would not say people would look at this and go, wow, this is exactly how a nonprofit should run. They're doing great things. The stories that are out there are fantastic, but I don't know. We still found that there's some issues with this organization.
Yeah, interesting. Good pickups. The selling the donor information, right? That for sure is a trust issue, right? So I'm going to give you my information to support the mission and the organization, but I'm giving it to you for that specific purpose. I haven't given you permission to share that with anybody else, right? And I can recall multiple instances when I was the CEO of the state bar where people wanted, we had 25,000 lawyers that were members of the bar, and lots of folks wanted that list, right? And they were willing to pay top dollar for it. And the answer was no. No, we're not going to do that, even though it could be a source of non-dues revenue for the organization. We could put it to work. We weren't going to do that without the permission of our members, and we didn't even bother going out to try to get that. So that's a good pickup. The other thing about high salaries. So one of the counter arguments, Kim, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, is, well, if you've got a large organization that's complex and you want the best leadership for that, you have to pay for it. Because you're competing with the private sector, right? You're competing with the private sector. So how much is too much, right? You look at, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but it is a bit eyebrow raising, right? Almost, 435,000, in a couple of years, is it going to be half a million?
Well, and I agree with you. You get what you pay for, but when you're talking about public trust and the court of public opinion and things like that, you and I and everybody here can sit there and say you get what you pay for, and I agree with that. But the general person who's donating $50 or whatever that looks like, say, man, even in our group we were talking about, what would I do with 435,000? That seems excessive. So even if it makes sense from a business perspective, maybe is not going to make sense from the court of public opinion or that public trust.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? You can see, I've worked with some organizations, and that's the first thing I do. You've done some sleuthing, obviously, in your group. Sounds like the other groups did as well. This is what the public's going to do too, right? The public's going to go out and they're going to look at. I think one group had looked at Washington Post article. Other groups have gone on Candid or Charity Navigator, and looked to see kind of what's going on. You know, and the media for sure will go in and dig around. And so that's not put out there, right? You know, that's not in terms of transparency. You know, one of the things that I always recommend that nonprofits do is don't make it hard for people to find your 990. Put it on your website.
Yeah.
Right? Put it on your website, and if you're ashamed or worried about the salary, the CEO's salary, or you know, the percentage of revenue versus programs, administrative costs, then maybe you need to do some soul searching, right? About what is, you know, what is tolerable. But that's a growing issue, and even the expensive conferences and conventions and stuff. You'll hear some people in the nonprofit sector say you've got to spend money to make money. And I think that was one of the responses of the CEO who was fired was, in order to make all this money, we had to spend some money because we're a big player, right? And so that's, you know, that's always an ongoing argument. Great work, Matt. I think you guys are the final group.
Yeah,
what did you guys come up with?
I think I'll just wrap up with a couple of extra thoughts. I mean, I think we talked a lot about what was already discussed. A couple of extra points that I haven't heard yet was the 60 cents on the dollar to the programs. So, and we've talked about that a bit earlier. Again, that's not a reason not to donate to an organization, but it certainly is a reason to ask a question. And it sounded like, you know, Wounded Warriors was trying to hide behind a spend money to make money type of thing. And I think that's I think we talked a lot about how the board failed to really provide that oversight and ask those types of questions and get the right kind of answers. And we did mention in our group, similar to what you had mentioned, John, that these board members feel like their membership on the board is a resume builder for them, and not necessarily trying to make a humongous difference in the programs of the Wounded Warrior Project and the way that they kind of handled the denial of the misconduct at the very beginning. We weren't overly impressed by the board's reaction to all of this. And then as Kim did, I also did some sleuthing. You know, the average board member, the average employee or executive at Wounded Warrior Project today makes $332,000. They got a $30,000 bonus last year on average. And so you do kind of have to ask those questions. Is that appropriate? And you're right, John, you do have to figure out, we're competing against for-profits, and a lot of for-profit CEOs get stock options. You know, they get a reduced salary because they have stock options included in their compensation. And so it is a hard number to compare apples to apples from for-profit to nonprofit, but it's certainly a number that you want to ask about and want to try to determine, does the public believe that's a reasonable number? So I think that's all of the only things we wanted to add as a group.
Great. No, thanks, Matt. Yeah. So what was the group? Let's open it up to the larger group here. Any observations about the media here, about how the media, what little, you know, was offered up in terms of the required readings, but some of you did some more sleuthing about the media. Any assessment of the media's, you know, good, bad, or indifferent about the media? And where they went to get information, and, you know.
Well, everybody knows, I mean, the media, their job is to basically sell the news, and bad news sells way more than good news. So essentially it started out the way that was supposed to start out. Start with all the bad news you can gather. And then over time, because it is a Wounded Warrior project, I think they kind of flipped the narrative, and then turned it into good news, and, you know, had that at the end.
Yeah, so always, Lance, always a bit, you always want to, like Matt's point about, asking questions and, not taking everything at face value. What did you, and I can't remember, Lance, whether it was your group or another group that was talking about employees going to the media, right? Weren't there employees that were
Yeah.
whistleblowers? Aaron, in your group, you guys talked about that?
Yeah, we have, we discovered that there was, employees who raised concerns when they were still working for Wounded Warrior, and they were, allegedly, terminated because of it, because of the money and the financial mismanagement. And then, they were interviewed after the fact, which some of us, I think, brought it up that we feel maybe this is how this all came to light and started. Maybe it was an employee who kind of was like, all right, I'll show you guys, so that was something we kind of talked about too.
Isn't that interesting? Think about that, right? So you create this organization with this wonderful mission, right? You hire people who, like you and your colleagues in your organizations, are committed to the mission. And do we think for a second that they're going to stand idly by if they see this kind of behavior, right? In today's world, and if you have whistleblower procedures in place, it's part of your organization's protocols, and an employee, and we don't know if this happened, but raised the issue through the chain of command and was fired, right? Or turned back. Do we think for a second in today's world that there aren't opportunities for those employees to go let the media and others folks know, right? Whether that's on a social media platform or with the traditional media, right? And so this really, from my perspective, speaks to culture, right? A culture of an organization, and it's not the board has one culture and the staff has one culture, but we all, right, establish a set of values that include things like integrity, things that, stewardship, those kinds of things, and we support and promote that rather than, not talk about it. Antonia, you had a thought? Please jump in.
And an observation, because that's what I was thinking as you were making that point, is that lends itself to the culture of the organization, but also alternatively, because we kind of talked a little bit about some of the organizational psychology even in the matter. But on the alternative end of that culture is the influence or the reinforcement of not going against, the leaders or seeing people being terminated, because, culture is all the things said and not said, all the things reinforced and not reinforced. So you build that culture one way or the other. We kind of talked too even about the leader, because sometimes you can create that culture where it's either a power of influence or a fear of being rejected, losing your job, speaking up, etc. And kind of thinking about the element of the leader himself, because what I found interesting was hearing more about these, there were the lavish conferences and such, but there is a piece about the entrances, some of the grand entrances to these things. And I found that peculiar because, you have an individual who scales at such a large pace in a rapid amount of time, and I think initially we talked about the ego of that, but Karem brought up an intriguing point, also the temptation, I think, for that. We talked a little bit about, or in my perspective, like group dynamics, you know, how many people were influenced by perhaps a charismatic leader. And because sometimes I think things happen over time when, you know, people intend well, but they're fearful to say anything or say something that might be, you know, truthful. So I think on the one hand, you can have individuals who can seek out the media, but alternatively, that can play in the opposite direction too. And people can stay silenced for fear of pressure or those group dynamics.
Absolutely.
So just an
No, I mean, it's very insightful, very insightful. I
Yeah, and
think, oh, go ahead, Karam, go
and the
ahead. Yes,
culture
please.
of leadership too, just to piggyback on, you know, some of the things we were discussing in our group. One of the things at Crossroads we're always talking about at leadership is how we as leaders hold each other accountable, and how you need to always hire somebody that's smarter than you are and hear them out. And those things might sound very colloquial and very, but to us it's the core of our leadership, because when we stop thinking about accountability and we stop listening to managers, the managers know so much about everything, right? And when we think we know we know it all, and we stop listening, things like this happen. Got a very inflated, you know, ego, where in the organization becomes leader centric rather than mission centric. And for sure, I could see that here. I really appreciated this case study because it has a lot of things. It's so easy to slide into, you know. It's so easy to, you know, it chips away. It chips away. And as you grow and expand, then you get this place in the community where you say, well, we're Crossroads. We're the largest. And things start chipping away. So accountability, organizational, and a review of the values, and hearing out, you know, the the voices that are not necessarily agreeable to us, it's super important.
Wow, two great observations, and that's going to be the next. It's a perfect segue, and I think he wrote in on a segue, Antonio, for one of his entrances, right? The segue and a horse in one conference, and a segue in another one. But to use segue in a different way, we'll segue into ethical culture, right? And talk about how do we create. We're an organization that's where people we're accountable to one another, right? And that we respect and we give license to our staff and our board members to hold ourselves accountable to the mission, right? And to all of the values that we've been talking about here. So I've got let's take a 10-minute break. And what time? I've got 11:15 on my watch. So let's come back at 11:25, and we'll finish up. We'll talk about the organizational culture and its relationship to public trust. All right, looks like we've got some folks coming back in. All right, we've got about another hour left. Can we do it? Can we hang in there? Actually, I think the time's gone pretty quickly. Great conversation. Great observations. Not a surprise with this group, given your experience and the organizations you're working with. So, you know, as we think about this case study, and we think about the different elements of public trust, it's my view, and I think the view of most people, and you would probably agree, that at the core of all of this is organizational culture, right? Because if you've got the right culture established for and as I said, not just the staff doesn't have one culture, the board doesn't have, organization has a culture, then you deliberately, or hopefully, right, address the kinds of things that need to be put in place as guardrails, right, to prevent, what Karem talked about, the drip, 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 right, the slippery slope where, it's one compromise here and it's one compromise here and it's one compromise, and then the next thing you know, right, your organization's in trouble. And so how can we defend against that? And so the focus of the next hour is really what I call applied ethics. It's great to talk about truth, integrity, honesty, apple pie in the American way, all of that. But what's more important, I think, as leaders is how, what methods, what practical tools do we use to actually create a culture, right, that is healthy, that is, that reflects the values and all of the things that we've talked about here. And as I mentioned at the very top, the public assumes they give us pretty high scores compared to other institutions. The public assumes that we are this way. I mean, the last conversation about salary, and Kim was talking about, gosh, these salaries seem high, right? The public assumes that they're not high, right? This is, if you're doing charitable work, we're not paying, salaries that are out of whack. And what is the right number? I don't know. I think that's always but it's, I think it was to Matt's point, these are the questions that we should ask and be comfortable with the answers. And then, facing the reality that within our organization, right, it only takes one or two people, or maybe just one person, right, to erode the trust. And so all the more important that we create sort of a standards of conduct, right, and a culture that we expect everybody to adhere to, and that we hold one another accountable to that, right? Because it only takes one person to really take us down. And so this little quote here, thinking more systematically about the values. It's one thing to have a list of values that we put on our website and post on the wall, but how do we, right, as an organization, make it a reality, right? What kind of systems, practices do we put in place to create that culture? Just a couple of thoughts here, in terms of the nonprofit sector. The sector has a history of independence, and so there's this sense of we are not beholden to necessarily politics or to personal benefit or making lots of money, but that we're independently focused on the mission and doing good in the community, that we have internal controls, right? That we've established those internal controls. Lance talked about the things that his organization does. External controls that we have, communication policies and procedures about who's going to speak for the organization, so that we don't, use our social capital in a way that could hurt our organization, and that we are significantly self-regulated, right? That nonprofits, through courses like these, through the our bylaws and articles of incorporation, that we're self-regulated. These are all sort of in the background in terms of the context where we create organizational culture. So let's talk about methods. And I'm going to open up the floor. This isn't, I promised you, no death by PowerPoint here. What do your organizations do to create a culture, or organizations that you've been a part of that you think are effective? What kinds of things do we need to do, or have you seen done effectively, to create a culture of integrity, transparency, accountability, stewardship, all of the things that are part of the things that when they go wrong create issues with public trust? So anybody want to start the conversation?
Sure, I'll jump in. Anytime we create a new program, enter into a new grant opportunity, present something new to our board of directors, we always say that we practice our TRE. So it's just something that we collectively as a group say, what is the transparency of this piece? Are we being transparent? Are we being transparent in word and action? How are we being responsible to it? So what are the responsibilities of us to present it, to hold ourselves to it? What responsibility do we have to communicate it, and where are we communicating it to? And then empathy, understanding where and how we can create a space of empathy for those that are being served by it, those who are being impacted by it, and those who are being held accountable to the responsibility of it. That's one of the phases. Another piece that we deploy is just do good, do no harm, and be fair. So does this do good? Does it create any place of harm for anyone? And if so, what is our action steps there to remove those barriers? And is it fair? Is it fair to all?
That's terrific, Flynn. And can you tell me what TRE stands for again?
Just transparency, responsibility, and empathy.
And empathy. Okay. So values, right? And you reinforce those. So does your organization, in addition to just using those themes as reminders, do you do anything to celebrate or recognize when people reflect those values?
We do, maybe a little corny, but we have wow bucks. So wow bucks and wow opportunities. So anytime someone steps into a space that they act within the values and the integrity of the company, and they serve the mission-centered work, then anyone within the organization can recognize them in that way.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's terrific. Others?
I can share a little bit.
Prem?
So I think we've done it from a infrastructure point of view. We have departments working independently. So one of the things we did most recently was bring in our own HR director. We've had grievance and complaints in the past managed by compliance, but now it's directly through HR, and it gives a level of anonymity, and we hear it out. We have committees on quality, and we do also committees on client safety, where staff have an opportunity to report and do speak to items of, risk and safety and management within our protocols. Of course, our finance department is completely independent. And then we have a layer of auditing for each of those. So there's a lot of, because it's Medicaid, and so we are always finding ways to have, checks and balances in place from the way the organization is completely is managed, and the departments are responsible to reporting to.
So it sounds like, and you just tell me if I get this wrong, that goes for everybody, when I'm processing what you've said. It sounds like a big part of your culture, your efforts with respect to culture, have to do with employee engagement, and they're involved in various committees to provide feedback.
Correct.
They're given license they're given license to say, I think we're going in the wrong direction, or I think we need to improve here, that kind of thing.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good. Others?
I'll say
Other
something.
methods? Yes, Ashley, go ahead.
So I just always think of transparency from the funding perspective. We've been in a situation with some of our biggest funders where we've applied for a certain specific project, received the money, started the project, and then something just happened. Like something crazy happened where the project either had to be halted or had to be completed in a different location or a different way. So we just take that opportunity to just set a meeting immediately with our funders and to explain the situation to them in an effort to make sure that they know that we're not trying to get away with anything or something like that.
Great. So that is kind of and I'm not suggesting that a change in the program is bad news, right? But a change, right? A change in direction or bad news. doesn't get better with age, right? It's not like wine or cheese. It gets worse, right? So the sooner, from a cultural standpoint, that's that transparency and honesty, right? Which is painful sometimes, right? Because you know, not everybody's going to think that was a wonderful, wonderful thing. But not hiding it or hoping that people won't notice is never a good plan, right? And so, and there can be a culture, and there can be a culture, right, within organizations, subcultures, right, silos, where something's happening in one department, but we're going to keep it a secret from the rest of the organization. That's another, sort of a spin-off of the point that you're making. But yeah, letting people know when there's a change and that's sometimes that takes a little bit of courage, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Other methods.
I'll just jump in and say,
Yes.
and this is going to sound very simplistic, but the fact is you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So if you have certain expectations you put out to the public about what you're doing it and how you're doing it, follow through. Make sure you do it. I mean, there are so many times I hear people, even in our industry, they'll make all these promises and then we'll get calls from people saying, I was told this and it didn't happen. No, don't tell people that unless it's going to happen, because the minute you fall short on what you promised or what the expectations are, public trust is going to go down. So you got to walk the walk completely and not just say something to make because it sounds good. Make sure you're going to follow through.
Yeah. So follow through is and so I think there's 2 points I take away from your comment, Kim. One is and that is, the difference between integrity and honesty, right? Integrity is doing what you said you're going to do, right? That you're being true to what you've committed to. Honesty is truth telling. But the other point that you're making is walking, the talk as a leader, right? So if you set these cultural values to the staff and the board, but then you say, yeah, but I don't really have to do that because I'm the boss, right? Or I don't have to do that because I'm a board member, I can, I get a pass. It's really for everybody else. And I think the strong point you're making is everybody's watching you and how you comport yourself. And if it's not in alignment with the culture and the standards of conduct, right? Culture is norms, right? It's behavioral norms. And I think somebody made the point, there are written and unwritten, right? If you're acting in a way that's not consistent with that, it takes the organization down, right? Down a path of drip. Other great observation. Other things that people have seen in their own organization. Yes, Antonia.
I think in terms of our culture, one thing that just came to me is I think that what we do well, that we try to make comfortable for everyone else, is admitting when we're wrong. This could kind of also be a reflection just of our funding source, because it's an interesting intertwined place, because our administration offices are also our day program. So, there's a lot of incident reporting and making sure we have to be transparent with when we mess up or staff mess up. But even to our executive leadership, where we have those open door policies with staff and members. But I think that for the most part, we can, and we encourage people being able to just be open with when they made a mistake, as opposed to being fearful about it, and then it turning into a bigger problem. But I think one element that's a positive for our culture that I think is important for the staff to see in terms of the ethical behaviors, we all have experience in service to our population, even directly at some point. So we've all had different experiences working direct care. I think we have a tradition of movement into being familiar with the direct work, and being able to kind of have a little bit more of that servant leadership. And I think that goes a long way, just because we're so closely intertwined with our with the members that we serve. So I don't know if I'm conveying that as clearly, but I think service, we can highlight that because we've also done that. And that's kind of, I think, an ethical marker of our organization.
Yeah, I take away 2 points from, and again, you correct me if I get this wrong. The first point about open door, don't kill the messenger culture, right? Where people can say things in a safe environment about what's going well, or if there have been mistakes have been made, that we're not going to kill the messenger, right?
Yeah.
Which is a tough, for leaders, that's a tough culture to get to, right? Because nobody wants to tell the boss they screwed up or something bad happened, right? And so to get to a level of trust, which it sounds like your organization has done, is a terrific thing, right? But to create that level of trust, and then the second thing is to connect everybody with the mission. Everybody, thinking about, what does the person that handles reception, do they understand their line of sight between their job and the mission of the organization? Does the person in accounting understand that, what the organization is doing on the ground in terms of direct service? And sometimes that takes a deliberate effort to orient everybody and reorient folks and boards, especially, to have them come and see, right, what goes on at the point of service, as opposed to being, well, I'm in HR, I know our organization does, but I've never seen it in action, right? Right? I remember my time at the Red Cross. When we had a disaster, we brought our accounting guys out.
Yeah.
We wanted them to see. This is, you might be back in the office on most days crunching numbers, but this is what happens, right? We're helping people, and so that's part of a culture that's mission focused, right? And connected. So you made two good points there. Others.
I'll share real quick.
Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
Full disclosure, so Crossroads is substance abuse treatment. I came through Crossroads as a patient 9 years ago, and that's one thing that I feel really helps has helped us establish our culture. Is 90% of the employees that work here are peers in recovery, and we've always, for the most part, always kind of hired within. Even our executive director, he is a peer in recovery, and it's kind of helped pave that way and set the tone for our culture. And we all understand. And for the other 10% that do not work, or that didn't go through a treatment program or not in recovery, they're around us so much that they get us. And like Karem, I keep singling her out, but she is she knows me very well. I've known Karem 9 years. She's actually my boss, and she gets me like really good. And like my sense of humor, and the crazy thoughts I get. And then that's like our culture is like, I can create these crazy innovative ideas, throw them at her in a mush, and she gets it. So
here's an example of our culture, our humor. Only finance and clinical are not in recovery. Everyone will think that's funny, but yes.
So it's just that's the biggest thing I notice when I'm hiring employees, and when I to see new people grow in the company is that's one thing they always say that stands out is the culture here is just fantastic. That you have someone who gets where they're at and where they come from. So I just wanted to share that.
Wow. Well, thank you for having the courage to share what your own personal story.
Oh yeah, sure.
With us. No, I mean, honestly, and I have to say, I'm a somewhat of an indirect consumer of what Crossroads does, because in part of my part-time side gig is I'm a judge for the East Valley Regional Veterans Treatment Court, and we send a lot of our veterans who are having substance abuse challenges to Crossroads. So yeah, well, to your point, who we pick to be on our team, right, is important. And sometimes in an environment where it is super competitive right now, right? Talent is hard to get and hard to retain. We can be in a rush to just fill the spot, and that can and it's true of boards too, right? That well, gosh, we got 3 vacancies on our board. We got to fill the board vacancies, and that's becoming more and more difficult as competition for people's time just becomes more severe. That we can be in a rush, and so taking the time, as in the great book written by Jim Collins called Good to Great, and then he's written a shorter book on Good to Great in the social sector. He talks about nonprofits and government, that making sure we have the right people on the bus and that there's a cultural alignment. Doesn't mean that we're foregoing diversity. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we want diverse staff and diverse boards that reflect our community. But in terms of our culture, honesty, integrity, transparency, stewardship, right? Respect, those are non-negotiable, right? And so spending some time and making sure that we have, right, folks on our team that we recognize and celebrate that and find ways to do that. Flynn Ann had some clever things that she does, but there are lots of that don't cost any money, right? Ways to reinforce our cultural values on the board too. Sometimes we forget to celebrate the work that our board does, and so it's one culture, one team. Any other thoughts before we move into our last little exercise here? Okay, I'm gonna, this is kind of almost too easy, but we might as well finish off with something that's kind of easy. So we're gonna do this. I was gonna break up into groups, but we're small enough, I think, and folks have been jumping in here just fine. We'll handle this little hypothetical together, and I hope that you guys will just instead of, like I said, breaking into groups and coming back out, we can do this as a larger group. So here's the hypothetical. You were a project director for a nonprofit, and you discovered that the payroll clerk has been falsifying the payroll account. And when the payroll clerk receives payroll from the processor, he pulls out those checks, endorses, and cashes them, and keeps the money. Think this ever happens in the nonprofit world? Yep. You could replace this with a credit card, using the organization's credit card. What are the potential consequences if you do nothing? What are the potential consequences if you do something? And what systems or processes should be put in place to avoid this in the future, right? So this is pretty rudimentary, but I think we can, what I always enjoy is, I know some of you will add facts to the hypothetical. There'll be another twist. So feel free to take us in another direction. But what do you think here is, does anybody think that doing nothing here is an option? Any takers on that? I didn't think so, right? But there are organizations, right? There are some organizations that don't take action other than to simply say, don't do that anymore, right? That when somebody has misappropriated funds or played fast and loose with the organization credit card. So what are the what are the risks here if you took no action?
Can I be super annoying and ask for an example? Because like in my mind, that is so wild that any place would do that. I'm sure it's true.
I don't think I've never seen it happen before, but I think as a nonprofit, you're especially vulnerable to this because payroll from an accounting side, and that's where my background is. You have to have more than one person doing payroll because of this. This is part of your internal control process, and I think on the nonprofit side, because we're so pressured to keep every dollar you know, a certain pennies out of every dollar going to programs. That means that these kind of back office jobs that go to administration expenses tend to get cut first. And so sometimes you're left with one payroll person. And if that payroll person is smart, they can start doing something like that. So it's certainly a pressure that we get as nonprofits. It's unique to us because we get pressured to push all our money towards programs.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I don't have a specific case study of, but you'll see every once in a while, right? This sort of people in business, companies or in nonprofits get caught doing this kind of thing. And here's the scenario where an organization doesn't take an action. It's exactly what Matt just said. There's one person doing this, you're hard up for staff, and the person comes back and says, oh, my mother has cancer and I don't have enough money to help her, and my intent was to pay back the organization, and I promise you I'm gonna write a check for the amount, and I just didn't know what else to do. And you go, okay, I understand, you were in a really desperate situation, and as long as you pay us back, we'll be okay. And I've particularly seen this with credit cards, organizations' credit cards being misused for personal use. But I had an employee in an organization, nonprofit organization, who received money for publications. And she was in a program, she was a program manager for publications. And whenever she got cash, guess where the cash went? It didn't go into our into our treasury, right? And she did it for years until we finally discovered it, right? And so, and you would never have thought this particular person, she was sweet, she was, did a great job with the program. But I'm suspect that she did such a great job, it's because she was, getting a side payment. So, but what are the implications if you don't do anything here? What could happen here?
I'll jump in real quick.
Yeah.
So it just a slightly, and not slightly, but a different situation. We're talking about theft here, right? It's a theft. And in our organization, we had very unintentionally, somebody wasn't clocking out when they were taking personal call. I mean, like personal meetings. And I mean, time a half hour at a time. And things are like they would leave to go do something personal and wouldn't clock out. And it always happened when I wasn't around. This person, I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt that it was like, oh, it was an emotionally charged situation, I forgot to clock out. Well, that's still theft of that time, right? That we're paying somebody to not, they're actually theft of time. The consequences of me not doing something is I've got a staff now, a team watching this going on, want to have my back, are totally mission fund related. They're knowing this is going on. They're wondering, it really brought down the morale of the entire team, knowing this is going on. Fortunately, it's a short time before I was made aware and I was able to take action. But if your staff knows something's going on that you're not doing anything about, whatever it is, in this case, it's obviously huge, it's going to completely tank the morale of your whole team. And they're going to, it's going to have this heaviness around your office that is going to make it very difficult to get that team building kind of things done. Other than just the fact it's illegal. You're taking money from the project, from your budget, you're all of those things, but just from a strictly team building perspective, when an executive director doesn't take action when something like this is going on, it can really tank the morale of your entire mission.
Absolutely, right. Kim's spot on this, right? When somebody doesn't act in a way that's consistent with our standards of conduct, right? And this, I think we can all agree, kind of going back to Ashley's, kind of you kidding question about, this is death penalty, right? This is, you get fired for this kind of thing, right? But it, Kim, and I appreciate you, softening the hypothetical here about stuff that maybe is not death penalty conduct, but it's not consistent, right, with our standards of conduct. If we do nothing, right, it becomes the new standard, does it not? Right? Oh, it must be okay. Yeah, nobody's doing anything about it. Must be okay. Or hoping that the person gets the message and, on their own. it has that's the internal effect of doing nothing, right, on our team, and in terms of staff standards. Brett, you had a thought?
Yeah, building off Kim's point, we had a situation this past year where an employee was acting out in ways that were clearly reducing morale of the team. And yet, because the employee was employed by ASU, it was a rather extended process to do anything about it. And so recognizing you do need to take action when there's misconduct, but how do you maintain morale in that intermediate period where you're allowing for the appropriate due process to take that action?
Yeah, that can be sticky if you know, if there's an issue about, you know, we need to confirm that this behavior happened, and so we're going to go through a process, whether it's an investigation, you know, whether it's some other process before we take action. And in my experience, you know, there are no secrets, right? We think that, oh, this is all confidential and we're going to keep this under wraps until we, you know, get through the investigation. The truth of the matter is, word spreads like wildfire that this has happened, right? Or allegedly happened. And so in my experience, the best thing is to share with the rest of the team, you know what, we're not going to draw, you know, we're not going to jump to conclusions here. We've you know, put in a process to take a look at this. Maybe in some cases you need to administratively, you know, put somebody on administrative leave, you know, so they're not in the environment until it takes place. But being deliberate about it and doing something, even if you can't take action until the process has happened, in my experience, is a smarter approach, because everybody knows, right? Everybody knows something's going on. Abel, you had a thought, and then Denise. Abel?
Oh yeah, if I'm gonna be the project director, I'm gonna want the full budget that would be promised to me. So if I don't say anything, a consequence of me not saying anything is the budget. Could be the money that she's taking for these laid off employees could affect what I'm trying to do, what I'm hired to do. So I wouldn't have any excuse but to blame myself. And if my bosses get upset because they know, if you know, I say I saw them doing this, but I never said anything, I could ultimately get in trouble too, and the project might not be completed.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah, this kind of conduct, you know, not only affects the reputation of the organization and the morale, but affects the mission, right? There's a mission effect to all of this. Good point. Denise.
There was an agency that I worked for, a nonprofit agency, that employed about 90 individuals, and one of their directors that worked with all the different departments was ordering, she worked directly with vendors, so she would order, I don't know, freezers and other types of appliances and things, and then go off and sell it on her own Facebook marketplace and that type of thing. She ended up leaving that employer, but I guess there was an internal investigation going on already. They didn't communicate anything to staff. All of a sudden, there was a lot of changes when it came to, because this agency also provided financial assistance to a lot of people, and the way they did that is working directly with their case managers, which at the time I was a case manager. We're doing direct service. So the whole protocol on how we provided financial assistance to individuals changed. And at times it was like pulling teeth. And we really had to advocate in providing the support that was so important. And it wasn't even related to the individual that committed this crime didn't do direct service. She was working directly with vendors, but that was the impact, but it was never communicated to staff. And so you had a situation where there was rumors running around within the agency and everybody sharing, you know, their experience or whatever it was that they had heard. But there was never any transparency about what actually happened.
Yeah. Great sharing of your experience there. Two points I'm taking away from yours is, kind of sort of proves the point that I was making about everybody knows something's going on, right? And so if leadership, if the leaders don't come and explain to the rest of the team that well, we're investigating this, we don't know what's happened yet, but we'll, we're going to resolve it, but we need to give, the process an opportunity to run its course, to be fair, right? The people involved, then people don't fill in their own story, right? But if it's silence, then everybody fills in their own story, and it's usually not good. It's usually negative. It's usually, oh, the boss is ignoring this. They don't care. This is such a a hot mess. That kind of thing. So there's that part. And then the second part I'm taking away from your experience is overreacting, right? So taking one person's bad, failure to meet the standards of conduct and creating a whole bunch of new rules for everybody else, right? Right? Have you ever experienced that? I've experienced that, where, suddenly, the entire organization's got, checks and balances that really go too far, right? So there's a what do we do, right, about this taking action with respect to the individual, and does it reflect some failure in our system, right? Did we not have the right check and balance, kind of Abel's point? Did we not have the right guardrails in place? One of the two things that I recommend to all organizations is, that you have a standards of conduct for your staff and your board, and that you do that be included, not just giving them a copy of the paper that it's on, but you do some kind of exercise or workshop every year for the staff and for the board, not just here's a copy of it, but what does it mean? Maybe you do some case studies, maybe you bring in a facilitator, maybe you do, I used to do in my last organization, we did gaming with it. We had, sort of Jeopardy, workplace ethics Jeopardy. And we had these scenarios, and we had people try to figure out what the right answer was. And sometimes it wasn't the right answer, but it was a great way to get people thinking about it. But to have the standards and to train and then recognize, right, when people are doing the values, and then as part of onboarding, new employee orientation and board orientation. These are the standards that we live by. These are the things that are unacceptable behavior to us. And what does that mean in context, right, for our organization? Lance, did you have a question? Did you have, oh,
No.
so yeah, that's all right. So that, those are some deliberate things we can do, but just having, some organizations don't have it at all. So that may be something, if your organization hasn't gone through that process, to think about maybe offering that, and then actually training on it, and training's too sort of clinical of a word, but finding ways to talk about it on a regular basis, and certainly for onboarding, that people understand, this is what we believe, and this is how we behave, and this is what we expect. And then, going back to Kim's earlier point about leadership, walking the talk, right? Reflecting on what we do. Great points. Other ideas here. What about so this happens, right? Something like this happens. Do we tell the board about it? Do we need to tell the board? What do you guys think? Yes, no?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. So Denise, and how do we do that? When and how do we do that?
Well, in thinking about the role that I currently have, and I'm an executive director, I have a close relationship with the board of directors president, and we have an executive committee. I would do, as soon as we would find out about it, I would communicate that, probably via phone call, and then come up with a game plan to present it to the rest of the board, along with a plan of action. And you've already probably have taken steps to fire this individual and all that, but you know, to put more guardrails in place.
Great. So Denise is right, isn't she? Does everybody agree with her approach? I think it's spot on. My recommendation would be to talk to your board chair first, or president, whatever the right title is, executive committee. If it, you know, depending on the severity and of the conduct, you know, it's sort of a judgment call whether the entire board needs to be immediately notified, or maybe it's in an executive session at your next board meeting. You know, this was identified, this is the action I took, that kind of thing. Do we need the board's permission to take action on something like this?
No,
No?
absolutely not.
So Matt, you're saying no?
Yeah,
What are your
no, I mean,
thoughts
this
there?
is a pretty clear-cut case of financial fraud, and you don't need anybody's permission to fire somebody over that.
Yeah. So this goes back to board management operations governance 101, right? The executive director should have the authority to hire and fire everybody else, and the board hires and fires the executive director, the chief executive, right? And so sometimes, you know, there can be a, you know, either a lack of confidence, or people want, you know, feel like they need board, you know, top cover, and they might delay taking action on something like this because they want, you know, the board to approve it. And you know, in most organizations, and certainly the institutional wisdom is that no, these are the kinds of decisions when it comes to staff that the chief executive should take action. Other thoughts about what about stakeholders and donors and the rest of the community? Do they need to know something? Do they need to know about this? What are your thoughts there?
I think it depends. And from a quality perspective, I know that it depends on your policies on incidents, incident reporting, stakeholder policies, and just the severity and, you know, the impact of, in this case, the theft. So if I think of something like Ashley, like the grants and this impacting maybe grant outcomes for sure. There might be a mechanism for incident reporting and letting them know what actions we're taking, etc. If it's something internal, perhaps it doesn't need to be broadcast. It's always somewhat delicate because then you have HR and employee protections. And so I definitely also involve my HR team.
Okay. So Karam says it depends. It seems like consensus on that. So we go back to Kim's change of the hypothetical about somebody who's fudging on the hours intentionally or unintentionally versus somebody who has been stealing funds from the organization. Two different scenarios, right? I guess the important thing is it's a question we need to ask when we do our assessment of the damage, right, control. Is this something that we need to share? And if it's a really bad thing, is it something that we need to get out in front of with the media? You know, do we call Channel 12 and say, hey, this is going to break, you know? I'm thinking of the organization where, you know, the hospice organization where one of the health techs was accused of rape, right? That's pretty big news. Do we wait until the reporters, you know, who are looking at the docket every day to see who's being brought in for their initial appearance, and they go, holy crap, you know? Do we wait for that, or do we get out in front of it and say, look, this is breaking, you know, breaking news, right? But we want to be the ones to break it. We don't want to wait for it to, you know, And so I guess the point here that, that I'm trying to make is 2 points is, are there, what kinds of things do we have in place? And we're never going to prevent 100%. I'm just telling you, human organizations, fortunately or unfortunately, are run by humans. And so humans are fallible. Not everybody's honest, and so, if it hasn't come to a theater near you yet, it will, right? There'll be a moment in time in your organization or another organization that you're part of where somebody will fall short. And it's a degree, it's a spectrum. But there are two or three steps, it seems to me, from a leadership perspective. What do we do with the individual? What do we do with the collective? Are there things that we, from a systemic perspective, that failed us here, either to identify that this was happening or to make clear what our standards were? And then who else do we need to share this with, right? From a transparency perspective, that's kind of the lessons learned, I think, from that this hypothetical is trying to tease out. Any other observations before we kind of wrap up today? Have I worn you out? Yes. Nap time. When you're old and worn out like me, we're closing in on nap time here. Any other thoughts or questions or observations about anything that we talked about today before I kind of wrap things up? Yes, no?
For me,
Gabi.
yes, for me, having these conversations are very important, especially for us that we are such a small organization with one person. My second person is a program coordinator. We don't have any staff to worry about. At the same time, I'm interested to set up systems or processes that will be transparent in our finances, but also help prevent the future of the organization to have documentation, to have, a trail of where funding, how funding was used, and in a way also protect us, the two people in the organization, make sure that nobody can question, the integrity of our work. So very interesting. I'm looking forward to do more research and see what, I can do in this area. So
thanks, Gabi. Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I should have made this point at the very beginning. So I so appreciate you bringing it up here as we kind of start circling the wagons and wrapping up, is that not every organization has a big staff, right? And so smaller organizations that might have one chief, that's the executive director, and then the volunteers, right, do all of the operational stuff that larger organizations, are privileged to have a staff do. But in a smaller organization, this cultural aspect is just as important, and in many ways a little bit more complex, because you're dealing with volunteers, and you may have on occasion a volunteer who feels like, well, because I'm volunteering, I can do it my way, right? And if Gabi doesn't like it, I'll quit, right? And then the organization needs me. So I think with volunteers, when you've got the volunteers doing so much, and they may be doing some of the financials, they may be signing checks, right? As two signature control. I've worked with organizations like that. Even more important, I think, to make sure that there's a unified culture and standards of conduct, right? Conflicts of interest with the board. You want to make sure that folks on the board understand that they're not on the board to do business with the organization, or to sell things to the organization, or rent or lease property to the organization, right? All those things are part of creating a culture of honesty, integrity, and transparency. Good point. All right, so as we think about the next the next session, I want to just remind folks that, you know, I guess I'm, you know, 25 years in the Army. My drill sergeant, you know, used to say, if you want to get the message across, tell them what you want them to know, remind them what you want them to know, and then tell them again what you want them to know. And so as you look at the project here, there's two options. One is to do one on public trust, which is what we talked about today, where you would talk about, you know, your current practices, a little bit of background about your mission, vision of your organization, an assessment of what your organization's public trust, you know, kind of quotient is, what its status is, and then a proposal on improving and expanding public trust. And it can involve, you know, many aspects, but I'd want you to identify key people, any community involvement, talk about timing, the role of your board, and then if there's any cost involved, because sometimes we engage in these initiatives and, you know, I learned the hard way sometimes. It's like, oh, that doesn't cost us anything because the staff's just going to do it. Well, that means the staff's not doing something else, right? So, so it's a cost. Time is a cost too. So as you think about if you're going to, you know, embark on this kind of effort initiative, you know, are there personnel costs or real costs involved in doing that? And again, there's a template to use, so you can just fill in the blanks. And so if you choose to do the public trust one, that's great. We'll talk about the policy proposal in the next session. If you choose one or the other, doesn't matter to me. It's not due till the 3rd of March, right? Right, Cassandra? Yes, 3rd of March, I think.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, okay. So next session, we're going to talk about advocacy, and we're going to talk about it in two ways. We're going to talk about how do we promote our organizations, and the different ways to do that. And there are lots of different ways to do it, and in some ways it's becoming more and more difficult to get the message out. But we'll talk about, you know, sort of some best practices. But again, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. I really want you all to be thinking about what your organization does well, or maybe areas where it needs improvement, so you can share that with your colleagues, right? So that this is a great opportunity to create what I call lifelines in your profession. The people in your cohort, the people that are on the Brady Bunch screen here, are all people that hopefully you will, you know, strengthen a relationship with during your time in this program. And there are people you can reach out to, right? And say, hey, Lance, you know, we don't have, you know, Gabby, going back to your comment about we need to put in some procedures and financial stuff, you know, Lance is a guy I'd call, you know, or I'd call Matt, you know, or any number of other folks that have spoken today, and say, hey, can you share, right, what your organization has? And it can always be scaled up or down, but my hope is that for you in this course, that you'll see each other as lifelines that go beyond the course, and that you can, you know, share the things that you've done. And so that's part of my method here as well. So that's the first part, is we'll talk about public advocacy and what we do, and then we'll talk about lobbying. And some of you have significant lobbying experience, and some of you have significant experience with legislative, with grants, with legislative activities. We'll talk about the rules of the road. So for nonprofits, there are some limits in the amount of political activity that we can engage in, right? Separate, I'm not talking about promoting public advocacy. I'm talking about getting involved in the political environment, whether it's, you know, your local city council, state legislature, federal legislature, you know, a mayor's office, governor's office. There are some sort of rules of the road that we'll go over. And some of that's technical, but I think once we go through it, it'll make sense, right? It'll make sense to, you know, that these are sort of these limits for nonprofits makes sense, and we'll talk about how to make sure we stay inside the lane, as well as different methods that some of you may use, and some best practices on how to keep watch on the political landscape, right? Because what we don't want is to be surprised by something that's going to happen externally to us, right? Because we weren't paying attention. And so we'll talk about how is it that, you know, we keep an eye on what's going on out there in the landscape. I always say leaders, you know, have to do two things. You have to handle the tactical day-to-day stuff, but you got to also be looking out over the horizon and around the corner. And so we'll talk about, are there ways to do that and methods to do that with, in many cases, limited resources. So any questions about today's content or the next session or the project? All right. So I've got 12:22. Any objections to quitting 8 minutes early? All right. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye, and thank you.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Thank you.
Any opposed? No opposed. It looks like the motion passes. You all have a great weekend. You know, those of you who are going to watch the Super Bowl, I hope you enjoy it. I haven't decided who I'm going to root for, but I kind of like the story of the quarterback from the 49ers being a local kid. So, you know, maybe we'll pull for him. And, you know, Mahomes has won enough Super Bowls already, so we don't, you know.
Aye to that.
Okay.
Have a good
All right.
weekend and thank
Be
you.
well. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care.